So I think Mark's explained, somebody dropped out, so this was originally going to be a half-hour talk, and so I've added like an extra talk as well. This one's a bit rough and ready. And then I'll move on to the planned talk. So diversity in InfoSec, and I've gone with not that sort. So I'm doing this talk because I go to quite a few different conferences, and I find that some of them can be quite siloed. So comes to tech conferences like InspireUX or B-Sides, and they tend to be more techy, and then go to ones like ISD Squared. That's going to get very annoying if I'm talking. Just bear with me. I realised the screensaver would keep kicking in presentation mode. Try that again. So yes, I go to quite a variety of conferences, whether that's something like a B-Sides, InspireUX. So things that are techie tend to be more focused on malware and pen testing. OWASPs tend to be a lot more software development lifecycle, DevSecOps and that sort of thing. And then you've got ISD Squared ones where they're a lot more regulation, policy and enterprise focused. And I wanted to share that there are various roles and how they relate. Quite conscious that it's a university today and that there are more things than just malware reversing and pen testing roles out there. So I thought I'd have the OSI model as a base. I'm going to play with it a bit. But it was just to give some talking points around roles and threat models and defence for those. So normally you'd start with a physical layer in the OSI model, but I'm going to jump straight in with data because that's what we're there to protect, and that's kind of the golden crown jewels, whatever you want to call it. You wouldn't have computer systems without wanting some sort of data storage and sharing information. So I'm broadening the scope. I mean, my background's originally network engineering systems and through to hosting, and then I've gone more onto the security side of those. So with threats, you've got the threat of data leakage, that happens a lot. In terms of offence and threats to that, you've got people wanting to get access to that data. That might be nation states, that might be corporate espionage, and it might be criminals wanting to profit off the data. In terms of external people trying to get that, that's people like security researchers, white hats, black hats, malware writers who are finding ways in to get that data out of where it shouldn't be. Separately, you've got accidental data loss as well. And that's why it's good to have policies, processes and tools. So in terms of defending that and job opportunities, you've got governance roles, information protection roles, risk and compliance. You've got regulations in and roles around those, so GDPR, with GDPR coming in, there are data protection officer roles out now. And then in terms of architects and engineers and design and operations, they're the sort of people who are there to protect all the data. Physical, again, playing with the definition a bit there. Obviously it means something very different in the OSI world. But in terms of threats, you've got nation-state things like tapping the data. you've got buildings access, and you've got disaster issues as well, and the event of fire and flood may physically destroy your data. So in terms of attackers, you've got people doing social engineering. I missed Freaky Clown's talk earlier on today, but I did see him talk at EMF camp a couple of years ago, and he gave a really great talk on social engineering and the job opportunities there with social engineering. Other roles, national security, GCHQ and NCSC seem very hot on trying to recruit people. And in terms of defenders, could be anybody from standard security guards, CCTV operators. In terms of defending against that, you do have things like having CCTV in pressure sensors, fire suppression systems, backups, off-site locations, but you need people to run all of those things, and whether that's a basic support role or people installing those systems and managing those systems, so data center managers and that sort of thing for the big data repositories. So, network, threats there, you've got things like DOS and spoofing and root poisoning, insider threats, people doing things like replicating ports. I have seen that happen. Defending that, you've got things like IPsec, and then people to defend that, people doing network security type roles. So, okay. Missed off my transport slide. So with transport layer, you've got things like SYNAC attacks, so your DDoS, like DDoS attacks. Again, to defend those sort of things, you've got people doing NetSec, but you've also got ops there reducing the systems forming part of a botnet, and working for companies that develop tools that prevent DDoS. So I know AWS have some tools available if you're hosting with them. In terms of ops, it's your standard things like running antivirus and other defense in depth techniques to try and prevent people becoming part of a botnet. And then I've just sort of merged session, presentation, application all together, and in TCP/IP land, they all just form part of application. So session layer, you've got things like session hijacking, and preventing that sort of thing is good development practices. So that's not just people being good with code, that's also people having oversight of development standards and that sort of thing. Presentation layer, in OSI terms, that would normally be things like encryption, decryption, and that sort of thing. With my modern terms, I'm saying things like fake sites and poor UX. So again, there are opportunities in security by design for that sort of thing. Intelligence, so being aware if you're involved in protecting a well-known brand, looking out for things like fake sites and that sort of thing. And then application, massive scope in terms of that, and very similar roles in terms of data. So again, good coding practices, developers, security designers, security architects. In terms of people who pose a threat to you, whether that's black hats or organised crime. Other threats are misconfiguration across the layers, and again that comes into process and policy, and having those standards to try and reduce mistakes and the impact of those mistakes, and also monitoring on those. And then there's layer 8, also known as people and end users. So that's having things like security awareness programs in organisations. It's people who are better at communicating than I am, who are able to train users and work with users, and also get the message across to the business. So there are lots of other opportunities that aren't just techie roles and aren't just offensive roles to help support InfoSec. So before I move on to the next presentation, though, questions?
I have sort of question observations out there. You mentioned, I thought it was very good actually the way you mix those things up. So, traditional definitions that don't mean a lot necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So the roles that are involved. So you started out, I say the data is the primary.
Yeah.
And actually you went on to some other key aspects, like operations. So
Mm-hmm.
a small operation for business could be disrupted. That could be quite a massive impact not only on the brand but on the share price,
Mm-hmm.
etc. I just wondered, I don't know if you've heard the announcement earlier today that I work out insurance, but thousands of people in the UK are at risk from Russia because of their espionage or monitoring of the national grid. And that's not necessarily dangerous, is it? It's something that we can't do without. When you get observations on what might be there, some of the older state claims sometimes that you hear about the security, observations on that.
No, I completely missed that.
Appreciate you who fed that information through. There's no data necessarily there, but it's an operations service. Russia's spending lots and lots of time monitoring our national grid for vulnerabilities.
So in terms of monitoring, are they just monitoring the usage? So then it's metadata.
The infrastructure,
mm-hmm.
networks, and all of the input of the IT capacity that's required to run the national grid. They're actively monitoring it, doing reconnaissance on it, gathering stats and looking for vulnerabilities because the centre puts thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people in the UK.
Yeah.
At risk.
So I mean that's critical national infrastructure, and that does need protecting. Would you count it as data? I mean that's a service. That's a key service. So for people doing things, I suppose, outside of the traditional roles, where it's still about keeping the systems connected. So it's about having things like the information control systems, the ICS systems running and being able to operate, and they need data to do that. So it might be data on how much power flow is coming through, is there an overload, is there a critical incident. So if we weren't talking shutdown, but that they were somehow trying to control and influence it and cause an overload. So like with Chernobyl, I know that was a terrible, terrible accident, but for somebody to force an accident by manipulating the power flow, there are controls in place, which is the ICS, but it's all about the data that the ICS system's getting back. And I'm seeing a lot more roles advertised that are looking for ICS specialists and ICS security specialists. I think they've always been assumed that in the development, and there's so much legacy, and the lifespan of a lot of those systems is they're not designed to last, a year or two like a mobile phone, or 3 to 5 years like a PC or a server. They're in for decades and decades and decades, and risk profiles changed with the internet and so much knowledge available, and then connecting what would have been isolated systems to the internet, and having so many more protocols and applications and tools available for people to use. So it's an interesting point.
You mentioned safety and then individual companies, and the fact that there are other things that cause disruption apart from most of the data.
Services, supporting services, but most businesses have some form of data that's need to run. So supply chain, manufacturing, logistics, Maersk. There's been some articles recently about sort of the heroic efforts that people had to go to at Maersk after the NotPetya attack. So, yeah, ops certainly have their work cut out. Right. So, diversity in the skills gap. So, Rockstars versus Plumbers. So, as mentioned earlier, I've come from more of an ops background. And as I mentioned, I also go to a lot of conferences, and some people have said, why don't I talk? And apart from that, I do obviously need a lot more practice. I'm a bit rusty. It's also because I don't do cool stuff. Some of the roles I've worked in, it's the basics. It's getting patching done. It's identity and access management. It's security design. It's reviewing designs and looking at architecture and that sort of thing. And the other reason is most enterprises and ops or consultant people can't talk about their day-to-day work. It presents a risk, both to the security of the organisation and also reputational, whether that's their employer or clients. So sometimes I go to a techie con, and the response I get tends to be a bit like that. And then I go to enterprise security events, and the response is a bit more like that or that. This isn't the case for everyone. There are lots of great people in Infosec. And there are great techies within typical organisations, and lots of researchers sharing their knowledge and time. Okay. No idea what happened there. So for those of you not familiar with enterprise security, it can be really, really broad. It's anything from securing physical environment, so that might be data centre, managing air conditioning and whether there's fire and flood risk and those sorts of things, meeting service SLAs, managing risk. I believe Chris Radcliffe did a talk earlier on risk. It's things like applying controls, looking at standards, creating policies, working with policies, making sure that they're enforced, things like vulnerability management, which tends to be patching, monitoring, checking whether the patches are in place, so things like raising awareness within the organisation, getting and maintaining compliance, governance, incident and crisis management, detection, root cause analysis, the works. So I've lifted this from Utah State. That is the sort of thing that you do see in enterprise presentations. It's not shiny, it's very basic, but you've got quite a lot to cover there. So they are very broad roles, and I know sometimes people have criticised qualifications like the CISP, that they're not technical enough. But there is a lot to cover, and it's not all about the technology. And when you take your standard enterprise applications and you add in things like online services, so whether that's e-commerce for an organisation or marketing, wanting a brochureware site, you end up working with digital companies, or if you're lucky enough to have in-house developers, and then you've also got to manage external hosting, which adds in and expands your threat model and your risk, or you're working with SaaS and cloud providers, and that all needs managing as well. So lots of organisations are moving into having digital apps or IoT, things like washing machines and that sort of thing now. So what somebody in an enterprise security-wise doing is really going to depend on what that organisation is doing, whether it is something like the local council who need administration services versus somebody that you would think of as a traditional white goods manufacturer now having things like applications and wanting to connect fridges and washing machines to the internet. So for most enterprise information security, it's not sexy work like pen testing. You're not going to end up on BBC News, but it's important work. So how does this relate to security researchers, including pen testers and the type of people you see speaking at more technical conferences or in the media? So depending on what they're doing, whether that's people in reversing, working for antivirus companies, or managed security providers, or even just having things like the major security vulnerabilities exposed, so the sort of work that Google Project Zero do, it highlights the risks of using service providers, so things like the Cloudflare issue, the importance of patching with something like Heartbleed, or even in how it can be having secure by design with the recent Spectre meltdown vulnerabilities. So I think that the important thing that I'd like researchers and pen testers to remember is your customers are not you. They don't look like you, they don't think like you, they don't do the things that you do. They don't have your expectations or assumptions. If they did, they wouldn't be your customers, they'd be your competitors. So I think it's really important to remember that whatever the role is you're doing, you're basically providing a service. So people in enterprise security have different priorities. They're there to support a business. They have different challenges. They may not have the support from the business to do the right thing. Whatever that might be patching. See it often said online, on social media. People mystified why organisations don't patch, and there are a lot of reasons. It might be secure by design, or just being able to afford to hire better coders, whatever definition of better you want to use there. So at the end of the day, security teams want to have good network and application security. Isn't always possible though. So researchers help keep enterprises safe through the products and services that they offer. And vulnerabilities exposed can help secure more support from the business for the work that we do. Which brings me on to compliance. So it's not only exposing vulnerabilities that can help enterprise security folk gain support from the business. It can also, compliance programs can help them too. I know there's a lot of different opinions on security versus compliance. I think everyone's probably in agreement with, so that the top image is from Thales. Compliance doesn't equal security. But the Venn diagram from Redspin, I think there's definite overlap there. So compliance standards such as ISO 27001 and PCI DSS require some of the basics to be done, things like patching and user management. And it tends to be getting the basics right rather than a blinky light box that help most organisations stay secure. So for researchers, sometimes products such as antivirus and services for SOC and pen testing are deployed because they're part of an organisation adhering to compliance standards such as PCI DSS. So again, it's about remembering that you're offering a service if you are in that sphere. So, my advice to enterprise security and GRC people. If you meet someone who isn't suited and booted, or look how you think they should look, please don't write them off as someone, write them off as some weird geek who doesn't understand business, enterprise security or GRC. You might be surprised. Don't be an enterprise rock star and dismiss lowly tech work or that it's just for kids. So why do I think enterprise people should go to tech events outside of their day-to-day and normal work, and what value does it bring? So I think it helps keep tech skills sharp. You're gaining insight and understanding emerging threats and how this relates to your environment, and think about updating your risk models. It gives you a sense of work and the effort that goes into security products and services. So quite often as an enterprise security person, you might end up either forming part of a decision-making team and being involved in the purchase of those services. And I think it really does add value to really understand how much work and effort goes into research and pen testing and the skills that they're bringing. And it also why you might consider one product or service over another. So depending on your organisation, why you can't run it all in-house. A lot of companies are far too small. I've worked for a lot of organisations where they still don't even have a security person or a security team. Really big organisations like banks are now starting to advertise for roles such as malware analysts and researchers. Vast majority of organisations really do need to look at outsourcing that. I also think it can really help tune your snake oil sensor. So there are lots of people trying to sell InfoSec products and services. I think by going to more technical conferences, you start to know what sort of questions to ask when you're evaluating vendors and third-party suppliers, and that it can make that decision-making process easier. But mainly it's about sniffing out the BS. But also just learning something new could be fun and interesting. It could even pique your interest and lead to a change in focus or role. So I've been really lucky that I've been able to go to Black Hoodie for a couple of years. One of the ladies there, say roughly my age, so a decade plus in doing systems and ops roles, and she's now gone on to be a security researcher and start a PhD. So just getting the opportunity to try something new, try something techie, could lead to doing something different and interesting, and lead you down a new path. So, advice to researchers. If you meet an enterprise security compliance person at a tech conference, please don't write them off. They may have more tech skills than you realise. As mentioned previously, there are some, especially the big companies, have really technical people working for them. I've known people who've been very, very low-level Windows geeks at some of the bigger companies. And I think just the fact that they're at a conference shows they're interested in learning, and we should never dismiss that. The other thing to remember, there's no magic money tree. So unless you're in a really privileged position to be an independent security researcher, the chances are you're either in academia, possibly self-funded, or being comparatively massively underpaid. And in the future, you might also be looking for private sector work. If you're working for a company offering security services, whether that is as a solo pen tester for hire or you're part of a large consultancy or MSP, your salary is funded by enterprise security teams buying something that your company offers. You're the service. So whether it's a product you're involved in developing, or a skill or a service such as an outsourced SOC or pen testing, it gives you an opportunity to meet your users and customers. So my advice to all, whatever type of InfoSec you are, in the words of Will Wheaton, don't be a dick. Questions? Hello.
Where do you think communication breaks down the worst between the kind of tech whole face and the compliance and governance world?
So
what damage does it do?
It does feel a lot like an us versus them thing at times. I think sometimes some of the very technical people don't understand why being compliant might be a priority for a business. That some people are so focused on the tech and the challenge of perhaps breaking something that they don't understand that the business also has other needs, and being compliant can save you from reputational risk and massive fines, and just having a process and consistency also aids things like uptime, so your availability and your integrity. I think I think for enterprise organisations, I tend to find that there has been more synergy between compliance and the tech teams. They don't necessarily want to do the compliance work. So I was with one large organisation, and my focus was a compliance project. And they're so busy with ops. I think it's that prioritisation of, you've got business users who are saying, I need this operationally, and you've got, it's like doing documentation. Yeah. So I've worked with developers, and some developers have gone, I'm not going to document that. My code is documentation. And nobody likes doing admin. It's tax season. I've left it all for the last minute. It's done. But a lot of people do see it as not fun. And I think that is the thing. I see lots of the promotion from people like NCSC are really promoting pen testing heavily. It's like to have lots of CTFs, and it's good and interesting work, but it's not the only thing out there. And I think there are a lot of good things about governance compliance, but not everybody can see that because it's seen as too admin-y. And I think also to get it working, I think you need a certain level of social skills to be able to talk to the business about it, get the buy-in for it. There's a lot of different threads with it as well. So you're not just focused on, I am somebody who's a network pen tester, or I'm somebody who's a web app pen tester, or something like that. It's so broad. I think the thing with it is so broad. And when you start doing things like, I was doing some ISO 27001 work, was you've got to interact with so many teams. So how are you doing identity and access management? Aren't the same people who are doing the development work, aren't the same people who are managing all the help desk processes for ID and V, and you're involving HR, and it's so broad. Yes, that would be helpful. What I see is there's normally so much pressure from the business, and with the business, I tend to be marketing. Does tend to be marketing. So they want to be seen to be. So it is things like promotions that people say, well, we want to do X because we think it's going to drive more sales. Or if there's somebody offering a service there, well, we want to be seen as the best brand, and therefore we want to do this really cool, have this really cool app or something like that, or this really cool feature. They're so focused on delivering, and particularly when people feel like either their job's on the line or a bonus is on the line, then I think it's really hard for them to understand getting all the extra work behind it done. Why can't you just deliver X? But I do think there needs to be a lot more communication, both between sort of compliance, governance, and so I'm doing a consultant role at the moment, and I've done security manager roles, and having the creative people, whether that's a developer or people coming up with ideas about how they're delivering a digital solution, that there's a better understanding of how much time and effort things take to get something from an idea to development, and it's not just having a coder pull a long weekend or an all-nighter or something. Any other questions? What would I change? I suppose there's an element of I'd like to see more adoption of not just ISO 27001 and PCI, but there's a lot of other ISO standards out there that I think would be good for organisations to apply. So I think raising standards in organisations by applying more of those type of things. What else? I'm trying to think if there's anything specifically technical. I suppose it's that thing of it can be a tick box exercise and it's very subjective as to how you answer something. So when I was doing the ISO 27001 review, I was told by the manager at the time, pretend to be the auditor and really challenge on that. So a lot of people sort of fill it in and go, I'm done. And I think if people haven't got the technical background, they don't necessarily know the right questions to ask to understand if they've really answered the question properly. So somebody's given an answer that they believe to be true, but it's too high level to really understand the risk that it's trying to mitigate, if that makes sense. So too broad a question can lead to being I want to say manipulation, should we say. Yeah, go with manipulation. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, you made some great points. I've always seen enterprise security as a good way of embodying people, process, and control. Mm-hmm. Really, I guess that's kind of my background as well. Have you seen, from your experience, enterprise security being brought into supply chain integration discussions a bit more earlier, or is it still very reactive? As in the business saying, we're doing this, and then you've got to jump to it.
I tend to see it being reactive. I think I've seen a few where they're wanting more third-party due diligence up front, and I think if they've got auditors in that are saying we need to see that you've done that and you've been through the third-party due diligence, then you do get that. But it really depends on the organisation. If they haven't got that oversight to begin with, and they're not having to go through an audit process, don't see it. And even then you still get a lot of shadow IT things happening. So even in organisations where it was, if things are coming in through the proper channels, then you've got the opportunity to go through third-party due diligence. But when you've got the owners of the company just going, we'll just put that in, it's just for senior management, and going off and buying a cloud service agreement on their own, it's going to get missed. So yes, and things like proof of concepts becoming production and staying production, and then trying to find the time, and then there's typically no budget to then retrospectively go back and do the due diligence. So it does always seem a bit like firefighting.
You don't think the message has got through yet?
No. I'd love it to, but I don't think it has. So, any questions?
So in terms of diversity of roles and enterprise security programs, what would you say to the sort of young people, undergrads and stuff who are over here today and seem to do that? What would be a good take on that?
So I think one thing would be to get work experience opportunity if you can, just to see what it's like working in an organisation. I do worry that some people who are going straight into tech companies and development houses are used to working with very samey people, and when you're working with enterprise IT, some people in that organisation are going to have different skills and abilities. So with a big organisation, you will have people who are doing Saturday part-time work or something, shelf stacking and that sort of thing, and they're a valued employee, but they still need all the training, and they're not perhaps going to have the awareness and maturity, and that sort of thing. So I think getting the opportunity to work with diverse people, because that's the real world, and getting some work experience. I think in terms of roles, I always think it's really good when I've worked with junior security analysts, if they get the opportunity in an organisation to start out on help desk, or at least spend some time on help desk. You get a better understanding of who the users are in that organisation, and what their roles are, and really what the business is about. So it might not just be developing an app for that company. There's ultimately probably a member of public that the business are trying to service or support in some way. I do worry that I'm not seeing many sort of ops type academic opportunities. So I think Lancaster had something with one of the colleges, where it was a foundation level degree that was a network administration, network engineer, sysadmin type course. But otherwise, if it's traditional computer science, there's a lot of emphasis on programming.
St John's at Manchester has a good security and IT governance.
Okay,
Course.
interesting. That's really interesting. Thank you. But they can be less operationally focused. What's other things? I think it is, in some ways it's quite easier for people to get into things like pen testing, because you've got all these online challenges and it's something you can do independently. So I think getting to see what other IT teams do, so that might be understanding what your DBAs are doing, because that's what your front-end web apps passing information off to, and that sort of thing. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much for your time.